Hello and welcome to our special Africa Cup of Nations show on France 24. Over the next 17 minutes, we'll be bringing you all the results and reaction from another packed day of AFCON action. 24 teams have been whittled down to the final four as we now know our semi-final lineup. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in studios by sports journalist Thando Sibiya, and we'll be crossing live to our correspondent James Vasina in Ivory Coast. Well, let's start with the latest. And South Africa are through to their first AFCON semi-final since 2000, beating Cape Verde on penalties. It was an incredibly tight contest with very few chances throughout the 90 minutes as it ended 0-0. Extra time brought out the best from Cape Verde's goalkeeper James Vasina, who made a stunning double save. No goals though, so penalties needed to separate the sides. Bafana Bafana keeper Ronwen Williams was the hero, saving 4 penalties to send his side through to the final four. Thando, I have to go straight to you, of course, our resident South African journalist on set. Firstly, how are you feeling? How did Bafana Bafana do it today?
I don't know. Yesterday I said it. We really squeezed in through the needle hole, and I'm so delighted. We don't have the easiest opponents in Nigeria, but I think for now we can just absorb the win and just be proud. And then I guess we'll see on Wednesday the 7th how things will unfold. We did it with Morocco, and I do think we're capable of doing it against Nigeria.
Both sides looked nervous today, didn't they? You could say Cape Verde have never been past the quarterfinal. As I said earlier, South Africa haven't been at this stage since 2000. It maybe looked like both sides were desperate not to lose rather than win the game. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Exactly. And I think also that there was very little risk-taking. It was such a tidy game. No, not a lot of tackles. There were not a lot of fouls. I don't think anyone was booked during this game, and it's a huge contrast compared to the game that happened earlier today. And I think that's also very interesting, the style of play. There was very good sportsmanship. So I guess it is that lack of risk-taking, but at the same time we can then say, okay, it was good sportsmanship. I just feel like you're saying, it lacked those clear-cut chances where you'd find people making those intentional advances at goal in the face of goal. And I just think that that's how we ended up with penalties. And I really, really, really tip my hat off to both goalkeepers. I think they performed so well. And I think if there's any players that we should be highlighting for this game, and if we're going to be looking back at this tournament, this is one standout point. Ronwen Williams, engrave his name on that trophy, even if South Africa don't lift it, because he did a stellar job.
Should be named the Ronwen Williams trophy maybe when they engrave it. But as you say, what a hero. He's the first time ever that a keeper has saved 4 penalties in a shootout in Africa Cup of Nations history. Just a little word on Cape Verde, because they are massive underdogs. They're the smallest nation in this tournament, but in terms of population, it's been a hell of a tournament for them, hasn't it? Even though they're not going to go any further, and they played some really good football throughout, ended top of a group that, of course, included Egypt and Ghana. So quarter-final defeat, but a really good tournament for them in overall.
It's an excellent tournament. I think the way they performed and the way they carried themselves since the beginning of the tournament, being at the top of their group, in a group that has the likes of Egypt, Mozambique, and who else did they have in there? Ghana. And I just think that they were able to perform quite well. Getting into the round of 16, it was very tight. I think that goal that they got at the 88th minute was by chance, but at the same time, we have to give merit. I think it's very easy to throw around the terms by chance, by this and that, but we really have to give merit. That if you're able to manage a game where you can even score a goal and keep that big match temperament until the 88th minute where you're still seeking those opportunities, you're still attacking, then we give merit where it's due. And I do think that Cape Verde is a team to look out for. Bubista is doing a very good job. Coach Bubista, I need to give respect to the man. I think he's doing a very good job with these lads. And I think that even if it's not the same dispensation, you have the likes of Bebe who are like nearing 40. So I don't necessarily think he'll be participating in the next edition of the African Cup of Nations. But what they have done to ignite something for the next generation to come for the next edition of the African Cup of Nations, and also to kind of set a foundation for the way things will be done structurally going forward. I think it's something worth noting. And like I said at the beginning of the tournament, these are the in-betweens that I was very looking forward to, is to see how teams like Cape Verde would come and perform and would stun us all and actually reveal some very critical players and also reveal a very nice style of play and be good opponents to play against, yeah.
Yeah, it's very much been the tournament of the underdog, and long may that continue. Well, Saturday's other quarter-final saw hosts Ivory Coast through to the semi-finals, beating Mali 2-1 in one of the most dramatic matches that you're ever likely to see. Mali had the chance to take the lead in the first half from the spot, but Adama Traore's penalty was saved by Yaya Fofana. Ivory Coast were then reduced to 10 men just before half-time, with Odilon Kosunu receiving a second yellow. The deadlock was broken by the Eagles, with Nene Dorgeles scoring one of the goals of the tournament, curling a long-range effort past a rooted goalkeeper. It looked all over, but the Elephants had other ideas, Simon Adingra firing home with virtually the last kick of the game. Extra time looked set to end in stalemate, and just when penalties looked certain, up popped Ouma Diakite to send his nation to the final four, then received a second yellow for removing his shirt in celebration. Well, let's bring in our correspondent, James Vasina, who was at the game today in Bouaké. James, I hope you've managed to catch your breath after what was an incredible contest. How in the world did Ivory Coast manage to pull that one out of the bag?
Incredible. What a time we're having at AFCON. It's just unbelievable, especially for Ivory Coast, what we've seen in the last few games. How did they do it? Well, look at what happened throughout the game. Everything seemed to be going against them. Of course, they had to make that change earlier on from that red card. Nicola Pepe coming out, and Immersify choosing to keep that defensive line, obviously holding on very tightly to that and paying a lot of attention from what we could see, because we could see Mali and the reputation that they have around their midfields was something to be careful about. And you could see in that towards the end of that first half and later on, they were pushing Mali towards the sides. Mali going down the left-hand side mostly, and that was basically an idea of trying to get some kind of a press to come back after that, because obviously they weren't going to send everything forward at that point. They needed to be careful about what was going on goal. But it got to a point where we were at the 80th minute, and there still hadn't been a single shot on target for the Elephants. And that was a tough one for them. That had to change. There were balls going on towards Sebastian Haller, but he wasn't able to get anything because obviously he was alone and he had two defenders coming at him every single time. So they pushed a little bit forward, and yes, Adingra comes in, gets that miracle of a goal to push them into extra time. As well, in extra time, we thought it wasn't possible. We thought there was no way that you'd be able to in the last few seconds. But yes, after everything that we've been seeing, it was Seko Fofana getting on the end of that free kick. And in the end, well, the miracle that we were talking about was, in the end, it was Diakite's, of course, his foot just at the end to get in. That was the miracle that was there on the pitch today. And Ivory Coast do it again at that point. Of course, the stadium absolutely erupting. It just seems, it just didn't seem plausible that they could actually do it. But in the end, sometimes you have this happening, and you've got a team that's down to 10 men, and they have that fighting spirit that the other team might not have. They know that they need to push for it. Down to 9, yes, in the very few seconds. Of course, with the celebration in the end, bit of a shame that having to take the shirt off to mean that he's going to be missing the next match. But it was that fighting spirit that they had. It wasn't the same. I think in terms of intensity, it was very different to the Senegal game. Immersify actually saying after the game that this was very much more intense in emotions, because you could see how it was going in waves every single time, and that was it was definitely a tough one for Ivory Coast. Fans were celebrating after it. We spoke to quite a few around the stadium. Have a listen to what a few of them had to say.
This match was incredible. We couldn't believe it. Playing nearly the whole match, 11 against 10. This year, the cup is ours.
We believe in the Elephants. Thanks to God, thanks to the Ivorians who filled the stadium. We are so happy.
Yeah, some joyous supporters there in Bouaké. James, I just want to ask you, you did mention those two red cards. So Kosunu and Diakite both getting 2 yellows throughout the match and getting sent off. Then, of course, missed that semi-final. How big of a miss is that for the Elephants?
It's a miss, but we've seen that they do have, of course, replacements they can do. We saw, of course, Haller come on today, see more of his play, and that was good. I think he looks in form, he looks in shape, so we should be pretty sure that we'll be able to see much more of him in the next game. As for the forwards, and they've got plenty more firepower left in them for Ivory Coast. Willy Bolly also coming on, of course, in one of those changes. He should be able to play a more central role as should be needed. He's done that before for the team. So there's just some of the indications that could happen for Ivory Coast. Of course, it's a side that is experiencing with things as they go along. We've seen this 4-3-3 kind of make a few changes here and there throughout the match, and it's something that's clearly they're managing to basically do with I think they're living the few moments as they go by. There's not always the biggest amount of organisation going on in there. They're able to adapt, and that's a good thing actually. So I think those are a few of the certitudes that we'll be able to see going in. It's going to be important to keep all that in place because of course their opponents to come to DR Congo have shown what they're capable of in their last games, and they'll be needing to keep all of that for the next one for them as well too.
Well, that's James Vasina live from Bouake. I want to bring you back in on this, Thando, because Mali will certainly feel like this is an opportunity missed today. They had many chances to win it throughout the 90 and then in extra time. Playing against 10 men for the majority of that time, it was a real chance to make a semi-final for them, wasn't it?
They definitely had so much promise during this game. I think they will feel robbed of certain officiating decisions, and that's going to be perhaps one of the few times where we start finding question marks around the officiating. But I do think that the offside call was a well-taken one, and that was for the first penalty that they could have won. And I think then that was when we started seeing a dip in morale. The match tempo did drop, and then it picked up again when the red card was issued. And then when they came into the second half, I think they did have that attacking prowess. And then as soon as Ivory Coast equalized, remember, they also are not on their home terrain. So the opposition are the hosts. The stadium is packed to the rafters. The atmosphere influences so much, and also the conditions were very tiring. They had their first cooling break at 30 minutes, and I think the second one at the 73rd minute. And so we already take those kinds of things into consideration. There was even a point in the game where I was looking at the players and they looked very fatigued. So you can imagine the mental fatigue of having to deal with the fact that you are playing against the tournament hosts who are very hungry for it and are also very strong. They're not the easiest opposition. They do have options, like James mentioned, and they had the likes of Diakite. They had just so many options, you know. They had Fofana in the midfield. They even had Fofana in the sticks, which I think is also another notable goalkeeper to mention, because I was looking at how he would distribute the passes. It's actually how he created that second goal. It was beautifully created. So I think if you're playing against a team like that, you're going to have a lot of mental clarity, which I just genuinely think the Malians didn't have enough of to be worthy of winning this game.
Yeah, it kind of looks written in the stars for Ivory Coast, doesn't it? They always just seem to find a way to win. Well, let's look ahead to the semi-finals then. South Africa will take on Nigeria. The Super Eagles coming through their quarterfinal against Angola comfortably. They're looking to make a final for an 8th time. Ivory Coast will be playing the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Leopards haven't reached a final since 1974 when they were Zaire, and this is what their coach had to say after a historic victory.
It's obvious that when you're in the semi-finals of a competition, the first thing you want is to get to the final. And then, if you ever get the chance to go to the final to win it, we're going to do everything we can, really everything we can, to make sure we have no regrets.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the hosts somehow finding themselves in the final four. Talk quickly about Congo. They'll really fancy their chances against Ivory Coast, won't they?
Definitely. And I think they also do have the gravitas and they have a leg to stand on. They're quite a strong team and they're very organized in attack. They're also quite organized defensively as well. And so if Ivory Coast play in that game against DRC like they played against Mali, I'm going to put my head on the guillotine and the chopping block here and say that they're going to be in trouble, because DRC is very lethal. They're quite dangerous. We've seen it in all the oppositions and the opponents that they've played against. They don't make it easy for them. They have physical strength. They have longevity in the game. They have mental strength. And like I always mention, the big match temperament. It's just now when you're coming up against the hosts that does factor in. And I don't know, there just seems to be a spirit. Like, I saw Didier Drogba went live just after the game was won and he was already on a flight somewhere else. It's small things like this. I really think that we overlook the intricacies of what this means to the Ivorians and how much it means to them. And as soon as they start dipping in performance, I think just looking around and seeing that this is big, this is here, and it's at home, and you have to work a lot harder. It is also goes without mentioning that the Ivorians are actually the last team with an African coach in the African Cup of Nations right now, going into the quarterfinals. So if there's a beautiful story to be told that's going to be written, Coach MS Faye, he can be something that's going to be spoken about for many, many years to come. But let's not go off on a tangent. Let's focus on the game against DRC. And I do think that they're going to have to tidy it up. They definitely can bring in the likes of Karim Konate, who plays at Red Bull Salzburg. I do think that he's also got that attacking prowess. He's young. He was actually mentioned as one of the stronger players for Red Bull's project. And so these are the kinds of areas, like James was mentioning, that they do have a lot of depth in attack. So losing Uma Diakite is not the biggest loss for them. They can then also see what strengths they have on the bench and then perhaps work in that in the upcoming few days. And then maybe they can cook up a winning formula that can then push them through to the finals.
Well, I can't wait for those semi-finals. I know you can't either. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you to Thando Sibiya in the studio and James Vasina in Ivory Coast. And thank you for watching. Both those semi-finals take place next Wednesday. So tune in then at 11:10 Paris time for all the latest from the Africa Cup of Nations. Goodbye for now.
Between 2012 and 2014, the Syrian conflict spilled over into one of the biggest cities in Lebanon, Tripoli. Symbolically divided by Syria Street, the Sunni and Alawite neighborhoods were plunged into a war that was not their own. 10 years later, an uneasy peace has returned, but deep scars remain.
بالعكس هو الفقر اللي نحن فيه كمان جمع أهل تنبني وأهل الجبل مع بعضهم من سنين 9 سنين إنه بابا في غريزة إنه على أنا وياه وكذا.
Watch Tripoli, Syria Street, revisited on France 24 and France24.com.